All right, we'll get this board meeting started. We're at the work session. I'll call this meeting to order. Roll call, Robert,
Here. On time.
Glenn, Merle,
Here.
Heidi, Jenny, Kelsey,
Here.
Crystal chair here, Glenn. Glenn is here. If you join me in the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, we're excited tonight to introduce you to the next principal of North Marion High School. And so Nathan Stanley is here. So Nathan, you can come up to one of the two hot seats here. And so welcome to North Marion. And I asked Nathan to spend just a little bit of time for you to get to know him a little bit. And ask for you to submit questions in advance, but hopefully if you do have questions, they are low hanging, easy ones. Ducks or beavers type of questions. So anyways, I'll turn it over to you, Nathan.
Yeah, it's my honor and pleasure to be here and certainly appreciate the faith that you put in me and, to be able to serve in this community, these communities. As the principal at North Marion High School. So just a little bit about myself. Born here in Oregon, in Oregon City, grew up. My dad worked for PP&L, so we moved around a little bit as a kid, but grew up in rural Clackamas County, went to Clackamas High School when it was a much different place than it is today. And went off to college at Pacific University in Forest Grove, where I did a number of different things. Kind of my claim to fame when I visit with freshman classes, we do a thing where the administrators kind of do like a road show. And I tell them my senior year, I was an All-American wrestler. I lived at the fire station. I was in the National Guard. So kind of a weird combination to, especially living in the fire station, that seems to be the one that they're the most interested in. And so went from there, got my master's degree and started teaching. And I taught in the classroom in one or another way for about 19 years. And then I was an athletic director, which overlapped with that. And then I became an administrator, which overlapped with being the athletic director. And now I've been an associate principal for 4 years at Tualatin High School. So I also coached, which for a long time was a big part of my vocation and avocation, and was very passionate about that. And found that I had some gifts in some other areas and just wanted to have a broader impact on the community that I was serving. And so I felt like making the move to a principalship was an opportunity to use those talents and skills that I have with a broader impact. And so for me, it's very important to have a holistic approach to education and really educating the whole child and think about the 4 A's that we talk about, with academics, athletics, arts, and activities, and really providing kids with a first-class experience and learning experience as well. Servant leadership is kind of a central tenet of my leadership practice, and so I feel very strongly about serving other people and having an approach to leadership, which is, about making things easier for other people to be able to do their jobs and to be able to leverage their talents in that way. So anyway, I'm just really excited and happy to be here and thank you all for the opportunity. So.
Why don't you tell them a little bit about some of the things you're doing in trying to onboard and get, before even you start in in August, so.
Yeah, so I'm doing a few different things. The first thing is tomorrow at 7 a.m. I've set up appointments with anyone that's wanting to sit down and talk with me and get to know me a little bit better and vice versa, just to kind of build some relationships. And so I've scheduled 4 different days for me to come over and to do that. So hopefully my goal is to be able to meet with everybody in the school plus by the end of May. And if they haven't had the opportunity, if they don't want to, I'm not gonna force anyone to do it at this point, but you know, just to get to know people and be able to start taking some notes about some things that other people are passionate about, what they want to share about themselves, and be able to form an opinion, you know, that's a little bit more informed than just my own ideas about the way the world according to GARP, so to speak. So, and then also I'm spending some time just reaching out to some other principals of similar size high schools, asking some questions to kind of fill in. Deanne's been very generous with her time and probably is a little tired of my emails back and forth. But was generous with her time the other day. We got to sit down and talk for a long time. And so I've kind of gotten a pretty good idea about some of the way things have been done in the past. And then I was on a phone call today with the principal at Astoria High School about their 9th grade success, and talking with the principal at Gladstone about how they run their professional learning communities and professional collaboration. And so just trying to get orient myself and kind of see what other people are doing. I've had a long conversation with the principal at Scappoose, both about teacher collaboration as well as their schedule, and they have some creative ways of approaching on track for their high school students and on-time graduation rates. So just trying to kind of learn a little bit as well as still doing my job. This is a full-time job as it is, but it's fun when you get to think about what's possible and what you know, what things are out there that we could do together. So.
Any softball, easy lob questions to throw this way?
We'll just go around the
Okay, go
room
for it.
and then feel free to say pass and you'll follow up later if
Okay.
anything's too hard.
Okay.
Robert?
Got any cauliflower ear?
I do. You know, they say that it reduces over by time, but I have 2.
Okay, let me
so-
steal their side, dude. Okay, you're legit. You're legit.
Yeah, yeah.
Is
Glenn?
that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have any questions at this point.
Come on, bro. That's easy.
Merle?
Yeah, I would say too, I'm excited to have you here, but the questions will come later, and I appreciate your willingness to give time in these 6 weeks when you're doing double duty.
Yeah.
Shows commitment and interest in life.
Yeah, what did you teach?
I was a social studies teacher, so I taught US and world. I mean, it's changed so much, you know, over the years of what the required standards are, but I've taught US history, world history. I taught Western civilization, psychology. I finished the last part of my career. I was the only government teacher at Redmond High School. And so I got to teach a lot of government civics and really enjoyed that. I did also get to teach some PE because as the athletic director at Redmond High School, they kind of plugged me wherever they wanted. So they were always kind to me, so it wasn't too much for me, but yeah.
Hey, one more question. Have the schools that you've been associated with, have they had like AP programs or IB, whatever it is,
Yes.
or have they had college credit like we do?
Yes, I've taught at schools with AP. Our current school is an IB school. Redmond for a while was an IB school, and Cleveland High School is an IB school. And then I've been at AP schools. Lake Ridge was AP, so was Redmond at one point, so was Clackamas and Sandy. And then most, if not, most of those also are dual credit. And I know that there's a movement back toward dual credit. I don't know if it's back toward or whatever, but yeah, so and I'm familiar, we have dual credit classes as well as being an IB school at Tualatin, so
Can I ask one more question?
absolutely.
Have you had experience with semesters versus trimesters? This is like, I'm leaving school board, this is my
Right.
last hurrah. So it was like something I've been looking at for the last 16 years. I've always just been curious about it, so I'm just asking.
Okay,
that's all.
so when I was at Redmond, we started at trimesters, year one. So we're gonna do like a 4-year cycle here. So we did trimesters. And then the economic collapse of 2008-09, we switched to a 7-period day. Actually, we went to a 7-period day and we only had school 4 days that week. So, which was kind of an interesting thing. And then we went to a semester schedule and then we went back to trimesters. So I taught in, AV block. We have an AV block now. I've seen lots of different schedules, and actually that's something that I talked to the Astoria principal today about their schedule, which is mixed, both block and standard periods. I talked to Scappoose, they have like what's called a January term, so I kind of, I think administrators are always looking at other schedules, I don't know if any of them. I think there's strengths and minuses to each one of them, but yeah, so I have experience in those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jenny?
I'm gonna echo what they've said before. Thanks for your time and, coming over and making the transition easier, I guess, for yourself, but also for us. And I look forward to learning more about you and how we can support you in your role as principal.
Thank you.
Kelsey?
I don't have any questions, but I'm excited to have you here.
And I'll wait on questions, but I am thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for your dedication already to North Marion.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to building that. Watching.
And as you can see, already putting in time and
Mhm.
excited for that. And he served in the final interview for our head football coach position. So we brought him over and had his final interview with that. And so that was good. And just want to echo also the comment he made about Deanne helping and being so gracious and really being a collaborative transition. And so we appreciate that, Deanne, very much. It's been very, very helpful. So, yeah. All right.
Okay, yes, you're good. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here. Okay. Must be a policy update.
Yes, so these policies are, so if you recall from some of our policy work, the dates and the months run together for me, so I'm not sure, I think it was February. We had some policies pulled off because there was a court ruling out of Kentucky that kind of changed the rules. And so these policies were the policies of the district back in 2020. So when this court case that I didn't look too in-depthly on ruled, they basically threw out the current policies and everything reverted back to 2020. Is that accurate, Diane?
Yep.
So these have been our policies before. They're now what OSBA is recommending to be in alignment with the latest court ruling on these sorts of issues. So this is just a first read, so unless there's recommendations for changes or things that you'd like us to look into, they'll be on next month's agenda for adoption. Right?
Well,
I don't know if they review these, they probably do at OSBA, but there's one word change on, I think the third one, page
Mhm.
5. Where it should say complainant instead of complaint.
Oh,
Where are you at, Merle?
which policy?
I don't know what.
Is it AC?
It's the one that has 8 pages, and it's page 5.
GBN, JBA.
I'll find it.
As a.
GBN, JBA, AR2.
There are two.
They only have that on the front page. At the thumb.
Where are you at on there?
And on page 5, there are 2 sections of 1, 2s, and 3s, and it's the second number 1. 5 JVN JVA-AR2, page 5. The second number 1, where it says a complainant notifies the Title IX coordinator in writing that the complaint would like to withdraw, and it should be the complainant.
Oh, great catch.
Withdraws.
You got that? Yeah.
Otherwise, it seemed to me, like you said, it's just a reversion to a previous policy because of the word change. And Supreme Court decision.
We'll get that.
Definition change.
You're gonna take care, you'll take
We'll
care.
take that one change.
Heidi?
I have a question. Did we do first reading and adoption?
Well, so I noticed that I neglected to say this, is that I'm noticing here that this was up for an action item, that we could adopt these tonight since they've been our policy before. So if we'd like to take that action tonight, you can do that. Obviously, we'll amend the one word, so, but this would, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ganesh, sorry.
This would make one less thing for us to have on the May agenda.
I do see the numbering is off as well.
Yes, we noticed that too, and so when I send them back,
Uh-huh,
and this is not, this is from them, so
Yeah.
it's not. They work in a different system than we do.
yeah,
Not the first time I've seen their numbering be wrong.
yeah,
Where's the numbering off?
on
All of it.
AR, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, as I'm looking through it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, does anybody else interested in doing, adoption tonight? Besides the first reading, to kind of shorten up that May work session, May board meeting. Cause we have a pretty hefty agenda for May with the budget.
I don't have an issue with it. I don't either.
You're good. Glenn?
I'm okay to move forward, unless we're materially changing them between now and then. If we're not materially changing them,
No,
take the action.
all right.
Robert?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I wanna,
I can make a motion. I move that we accept the policies as presented with the changes as noted by the superintendent that will be made. Take a motion that we do first reading and adoption.
do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
I don't have any discussion on these specifically, but I did want to just ask that when we get policy changes or updates, if we could see the red lines like we have in the past, that's always super helpful.
These didn't have any red lines.
Okay,
These were more
Fair enough.
reverting back to the
Mhm.
original policy that was already adopted. So there were no red line, any brackets, stuff like that to resolve.
I saw a couple things in there that were.
On the DBN.
yeah, there's
There's a couple of them.
a few things, but I think I was just looking for more over like,
Red
this is
line.
the difference between. I just heard Dan say that these are old policies, but we didn't see anywhere in our packet that's saying like, we've had these policies before. That's all.
It
I
was
mean,
on
it's
the
not a
top
big
of
deal.
each policy.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I also did have problems only being able to view part of the actual policy. It would only pull up like the
Yeah.
front page. So I don't know if that's a Google thing
It might be, cause even Linda and I tested it again today and it worked.
and it worked fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must just be on my end when I don't have Google stuff, but okay.
But if you were to look at it, and I understand what you're saying, Jenny, cause we typically do.
Yeah.
We'll explain every red line to you. But these are just a little bit different, and so at the beginning of each policy, right there it tells you. What that change was, the policy,
Okay,
so that's why you didn't see red lines.
okay, thank you.
Okay, and so for Merle?
The other thing that I hadn't been aware of, Rick Stuckey's message to us is that we had not adopted everything last time that we thought we had. And we started planning to do that, he says, is that right? Dan?
Not sure on that one.
He said,
Oh, I can explain it. It's that one we were talking about. This is a twin to JBA GDN.
uh-huh.
And so when we submitted all of our policies for the rewrite, they're exactly identical. Those got left out, so they're back.
So they're here now.
Right.
I thought he was saying, you know,
No,
they're reversed, it's the same, exactly the same policy, JVA and DN or whatever, and then vice versa, and that we just approved one and not the other, but if they're both here
Mhm.
and we're approving them, then we're okay. I would say though, I agree with Jenny that if we had approved a different policy with the changed wording that was under the Biden administration, they changed the definition. Yes. I don't know how the wording's changed, but they could have shown the way it is now and crossed out and substituted, and that's what we want to see. What was changed when we're going back.
So as we move forward with policy updates, I will pay closer attention to the red lines and when they're missing, I will contact Dan and Diane and ask them for a red line version or to request a red line version from OSBA.
Thanks.
I don't have a contention with it either on these, but on back. There.
I think we're ready for vote.
Any other discussion before we move to a vote? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. We were going to appoint a budget committee member. Is he online? You don't see him? Hi, Jim. I know you don't have a microphone, but thank you for applying for the budget committee. And just so you know, you can contact Diane for the information and Linda around when our meetings are, and they'll get that information.
I'll be putting out an email around the 1st of May on when, where, what. I think Diane already
Okay.
just mentioned, put it out to the whole committee.
And you know how to get a hold of me, so if you have any issues, you can contact me and I will get you connected. So do we need an action for this piece?
I think we do.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we appoint budget committee member Jim Yonley. Yep. Yonley.
Yeah.
To position 5.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, motion carries.
Welcome aboard.
All right, the next thing on the agenda is that, as you know, we concluded bargaining with our classified union, and it was a very successful bargaining session. Went through pretty quickly, and so we provided you, this is the same information that has been shared with the classified union membership, and they will be meeting Wednesday afternoon and then conducting a vote, a ratification vote. So when we come together in May, it would be hopeful that the classified union ratified the contract and then it'll be up for you to approve. So we thought we'd have a discussion if there's any need for discussion here tonight, and then that way on May 12th, it can just be voted upon. That's under the assumption that classified union will ratify later this week, or I think it might, the voting closes early next week.
Okay.
And we've got
You were saying,
the
okay.
summary changes posted here.
Will we eventually have a copy of the full contract?
Yeah, there's a red line copy in here.
Oh, okay.
So there's two attachments, there's a
Yeah.
summary page and a red line.
Yeah, I did see that. I was just.
And it'll get cleaned up after the vote if it's right.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Not hearing any questions.
Any questions?
Seems like I had something. Let's see it. So I guess I'll just have to let it know. There was a note here about vacations and added language. I wondered if that changed the number of days.
No, it didn't change the number of days, Merle. It just was clarifying when they could be used, and if they weren't used, what would happen.
Okay,
Article 11.
and I noticed one other that said many changes, but I didn't. The discipline and dismissal, many changes, but I didn't see anything that egregious when I looked at the contract, so.
Yeah, we changed the probationary period to be 180 days, or essentially 6 months versus a percentage. And that does not count break period, so that 180 day is, so you would not include winter break, spring break, or summer break. So it just changed how the probationary period is determined, essentially 6 months. So that was one change in there. And that was probably the extent, yeah. And there had been an MOU previously related to some state legislation that got brought into the contract regarding dismissal of probationary classified folks. So,
Are we still on a year 3 reopen?
Correct.
Is that part of the deal? Okay.
but it is only the year 3 is only wages, so insurance is locked, so
Everything's-
only wages, and each party can open 2 articles
sections.
of their choosing.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on?
Well, I just want to really thank Linda for how successful this was. I knew it was going to be successful when we met with the union in January, February. And the word I will never forget was when they said, Linda, we want to get started so that we can finish while you're still here because we trust you. And I thought, that might be the best compliment I've ever heard in a negotiation context. And really, the proposals that we had for that last session were all Linda's and really were the key to that successful last session. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks a lot, strong per usual.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna move over here with my partner in crime here.
I'm trying so hard. They didn't leave me mouse, so I got.
You could actually just do it as a slideshow, just hit the button at the top,
Love to, yes.
more right,
More right.
more towards Jenny.
I need a mouse.
All right, so this presentation came from the last board meeting, and there were a couple questions that we heard. That was kind of the basis for us to build this, and when I say us, it's mostly Des. And that was the question of some questions or concerns around not getting enough traction on seeing some improvement in our data, and a question related to, have we ever looked back to see when our data was stronger and, kind of learning from that. And so this is a pretty deep look into probably the last 10 to 15 years of student performance data, really just to kind of ground us in what does the history say about our student performance data. And so going through this, we'll just start going through is talking a little bit about the demographics of our district. And as we know, our student population is dropping. And so that just tells you how many students came to school, I guess 12-ish years ago, to how many are coming today. Then the next slide talks about the changing demographics about who's coming to school. And so you can see there, the blue is anybody who, the percentage of students who have ever been in our ELL program, whether they're still in or were in the English language learner program. That gives you an idea that we've been increasing in that capacity. And then also, as we go through the slide presentation, you'll see different, what you can call subgroups or groups that are categorized. So our two primary groups, and sometimes you look at things through race and sometimes you look through ethnicity. And so when we capture information, when students come to school and their parents sign them up and they check boxes as to either what race or ethnicity, we have two primary groups. So we have, as you can see there, this current year, we're 39% are white and 56% are Hispanic. And so, and sometimes you'll see Hispanic and sometimes you see Latino or Latinx, and they're used interchangeably. So there's, you know, people have their own definitions. You'll most likely hear me say Latino most of the time. That's just my own kind of experience and kind of just how I typically say, but I've used Hispanic, especially if I'm reading it on a screen. So, so that's our changing demographics.
Go back one slide too. Another thing to point out with this is while our Latino population is growing, as is our students who qualify as language learners, you'll notice there's still a gap between those two. So just because our student population or a student might identify as Latino does not automatically mean they're language learners. So, you know, 41% are language learners, but 56% overall. So a lot of them who come in with English as their first language. So that aspect is something to consider too.
Next slide. And so we're gonna just give you a brief, oh, go ahead, Merle.
I think you answered my question, but I was puzzled over what is ever ELL. And I think now I know, that means having ever been in that program, however little or much.
Yeah.
And I thought it meant everlasting. And
Well,
Well, in some ways it kind of does. There's two aspects of it. One is, typically a student takes about 5 years once they've been identified to exit out, which means they've gained enough language proficiency to pass the ELPA. That's the test we use to determine their eligibility. But what we know is even though they've passed the ELPA, there's still language that they're learning and will continue to learn. In part because, just like for all of our students, the language becomes more complex as they move through the school system. So they may exit the ELL program when they're 5th graders, but 6th graders, the language demand's a little higher. In 8th grade, it's even a little higher. In high school, it's a little higher. And they stay in monitoring status for 2 years? 3 years?
I think it's 3.
3 years. So we watch their grades to make sure that they don't slip. Students who maybe were doing well when they had extra support through the ELD program, but maybe like we see that once they don't have that support, they're struggling. And so we monitor them for 2 years and then recognize that even when they're out of monitoring status, they still need additional supports because language acquisition for all of our students is ongoing as the language becomes more complex.
yeah, so still significant to know that's where they've been.
Absolutely. Yep.
Makes sense.
So this is a quick history lesson of education in the United States. So we're just gonna come over a few important events in public education. Go ahead, next slide.
All right, so the first one is around IDEA, which is the laws that helped get students with disabilities into our classrooms. Prior to IDEA passing, only 1 in 5 students who had a disability were in a public education setting and allowed to receive a public education. That meant that sometimes they were homeschooled, they were institutionalized, they went to special schools and weren't allowed in our public schools. Once 1975 and that law passed, we saw an increase of those students in our schools, and our schools had to change to learn how to serve them better. Between 1994 and 95, 63% graduated and 34% students with disabilities dropped out. In 2027 to 2018, we see that increase of 72% and with a 16% dropout. And a lot of that is reflected in our data too, like what are we changing to make sure that all of our students have access and have their specific needs being met.
Next slide.
Yep, right in.
All right, so. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the same thing goes with our language learners. There were laws that were changed between the 1920s and the 1960s. The laws basically said if you came in and didn't speak English, you were plopped into an English only classroom. And if you were struggling and didn't want to come to school anymore, you dropped out. And we didn't really do much to make sure that we had the right supports in place to have them access education. And throughout the 1960s and 70s, we saw changes in the law that allowed us to put things into place to ensure that students could get appropriate education, including laws that allowed us to teach in a bilingual setting, et cetera. And in 1994, we saw a really comprehensive reform of the educational system that allowed us to build programs that increase professional development to make sure that teachers had the right tools to access and help students.
All right, so this is where we've been over the last 25 years is we've been on a kind of a roller coaster ride of a lot of different initiatives aimed at improving education. And so you can read the list of things there that have come about. And I think in the last 5 to 10 years, this has become ever more politicized. And with the polarization that you see in our country, you also see it, and we'll show you some data points later on in our own local context, that as things have become more polarized, you're seeing that play out even in our schools. And do you want anything to highlight in that list there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that's so interesting and part of it is like that span is when I basically started my teaching career. I started in 2003. And the reality that we've had that many initiatives just in the span of my teaching career, let alone a lot of your kids' educational career, every time one of those changes happens, we have to upturn everything we're doing. Our reporting changes, our fundings changes, how the standards we're using changes, the pedagogy that we're supposed to be using changes. And then in Oregon specifically, every state, 7 years, they revise the standards. And sometimes they stay kind of the same and sometimes they're very, very different, like when Common Core came in. And the state assessment system, how we're measuring how kids are doing, has been in constant flux since Smarter Balance came in. And the last 5 years, it's been in like every year something changes. Like how many questions the test is going to take, how long the test is going to take, what they're going to give us in terms of data. Every year something's new, and our grading practices on top of that have changed. So for me and for Dan, as we were talking about this, and we started to think like, when are we going to see traction? These are some of the things that impact our traction. They impact every school's traction, but we definitely can feel how they're impacting our traction.
I think the last thing to comment on here is just kind of almost what sort of feels coming full circle, because their No Child Left Behind, which was obviously a national initiative, was heavy into accountability. How do we hold schools accountable for student performance? And, I think that 2015 with Every Student Succeeds Act tried to kind of change the approach. Now Governor Kotek has pretty much demanded that there be new accountability measures within the state of Oregon, which I sent you something today on all of those bills and the different aspects of those. So those are currently in legislation right now. We do have both within the business department and within the administrative department trying to speak sense into those bills, not because we don't want accountability, but we also want to be able to manage the accountability and be able to provide the data to support, because we do want high expectations for our students. So Gonna pause there. Well, this last thing is that all of that to say that public education is incredibly complex. When who you serve, how we serve is always changing. What we do is an incredibly complex thing. So we'll pause there. Are there any questions on that?
Robert?
No questions.
Glenn?
Of comments in my head.
Oh,
So on the slide with education reform, that last comment about grading practices have fundamentally remained the same. Is that sort of an editorializing on standards have changed, but the way we grade a particular student within a class to either move and, advance them?
That was my editorialized
Okay, so
statement. That
so are you
was,
saying that has not kept pace, or is it a mismatch for what we're trying to achieve now?
I think that was my statement and it is an editorial statement, is that while the standards are always being revised. My concern with that is how do we communicate to families how their kids are doing when we are, especially, and this is more at the secondary level. When families are still relying on the ABCDF system to communicate how my child's doing. Is that adequately telling parents how their kid is doing?
It's actually doing.
And I'm not here to propose that we do that because that, that will bring
I
out
just,
all sorts of tough conversations. But it does make it problematic, because if you go back to a previous presentation from several months ago, where I talked about what our grades in math look like versus our scores, there's a huge disconnect.
Yeah.
So how do we effectively communicate to families how their kids are doing to the assessments, when how we communicate is largely the same thing we all grew up with at the secondary level?
so is it a fair statement to say that standards, there is a whiplash sort of environment there now, like we have standards and then we change them, and then we change them again and
Add to them.
and we've never really okay. Which isn't a problem that we can solve here.
No.
No,
No.
However, it's definitely a factor.
yeah.
Yeah.
Including the fact that, one thing that's always kind of a common. There was this, I'm not gonna get it exactly right, but there was a statistic they did, like, they took all the standards. And said if you spent like an hour on each standard that we are asked to cover, you'd have to add like 2 years of schooling to just talk about them for an hour, not spend weeks to actually help kids learn. So then the other aspect is when the standards keep changing, we have to always be thinking, what are the priorities? What do we anticipate that they're gonna be assessed on? What are the standards the kids have to know so they can learn the next thing and learn the next thing and learn the next thing? And when that's always changing, it's like you're going towards a moving target, including when what we know is they're gonna be given a test, but we're not exactly sure what standards that test is gonna cover, because we know we can't cover all the standards that they've told, nor could they test on all the standards they've asked us to teach. They're gonna pick priority standards, but they aren't always super transparent about what those priority standards are. So we kind of have to make a best guess, and it's possible, we've had experiences where, like, teachers will like, oh, I gave a test, they asked a question about this, I'm not gonna cover that for 3 more weeks. Like, the kids couldn't get the answer because of that, we haven't taught it yet. So like, there's a lot of that, and having to, every time there's new standards, it's, okay, well, what are the priorities this time? We have to redo our maps, we have to redo this to be able to figure it out.
Well, why do homeschoolers get it right? How come they're getting it? They're not guessing.
Well, it depends on how, like, homeschool students don't have to take the same assessment we
Right.
do, so there wouldn't, I wouldn't know how they're doing on that standardized assessment. So I don't know if I can compare how a homeschool student is doing compared to a student's going through our system.
Good, Glenn? Merle?
I had some question, if you could just explain a little more what the massive changes in the past 5 years are. And then my other was more of a comment, I guess, or saying just, is this a matter of an ever-changing goalpost that hinders the teaching process?
Yeah.
And assessments and standards, from a book I once read, unstable as water.
Yep, yes, true on that. The massive changes, So I'll give a good example. Smarter Balance, when it first came out, which was about 2014, 2015, 14, 15 is when that was the first year of that test. So it's been 10 years. The last 5 years, they went from that assessment, when it first started and the first 5 years, it commonly, they would give an estimate that it was gonna take 3 hours. It typically took 6, 8 hours. These last 5 years, they're like, we've got to cut down on these tests, and make them shorter. So we went from a test that was like 60 questions long to a test that was 24 questions long. That is a very big difference in what they're actually assessing. We went from an assessment that was largely, they would do what was called a performance task. That performance task was largely hand graded. It's now graded by computer. So even the feedback we got, it used to be, we would get data from the state that would say, these are all the different kind of categories of standards. And they would give you a check plus minus in terms of, are your kids meeting that standard? That's now been cut down to like 3, I think, versus like 8 pieces of data. We get like 3 pieces from it, partly because they've shortened the test so much. And the state has changed from saying like, this is the purpose of this assessment, to kind of saying, don't put all your eggs in this assessment basket. It's just kind of a snapshot of the health of your district, which is a very different message than we had been receiving in the last 5 years. So those are like just a few ways that test has changed dramatically. Our schools used to prep to have testing last weeks. And now usually we can get it done in a couple days, which is great. But in terms of the data we get, less informative, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
Heidi? I'm okay with that. Jenny?
If the data that we are getting is less informative, then how can we use such a small piece of feedback and expect our kids to make these giant leaps forward?
Yeah.
And our teachers too, like, let's not forget about it. It's not just the kids not being able to learn, but are the teachers able to teach with, curriculum changing, standards changing, like, target is moving, so.
Yeah.
Not that, those are rhetorical questions, just, I hear your guys'.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a short answer to it, which is like, that's where our need to create a better system, a better assessment system that is more about our internal assessments than it is reliance on this external assessment. So that we have our internal knowledge of, we know what the standards are, we have data to prove it, we have evidence, we have student portfolios, things like that, versus let's see if we can do a shot in the dark on one test and see if it proved that we did the right thing. So you're absolutely right. It's really, and that actually speaks to Dan's commentary on the grading, like that piece of clearly articulating what are the standards we're teaching and what is the evidence we have to know that kids are making it or not. And then how do teachers use that information to inform their teaching and make changes?
Kelsey?
No, I'm serious.
Okay, so, what we're gonna do, we're gonna kind of break this down. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on each of these slides, but this is that longitudinal data that we have. And so this is just to kind of show how we have done over time, and how our different, demographic groups have done in comparison to each other. One thing that's an interesting observation that I made as we were looking at these graphs is usually when we talk about this kind of data, we talk about the blue bars because we were looking at an all student group. And so there was these times where, especially in like 2011, where we were at a pretty high level. The difference though, is that if you look at our subgroups, that high level was bolstered dramatically by our white students. Our Latino students were underperforming the all group, and really it was the average of our white students with our Latino students that got us that nice blue bar where it's at. So we know that we're having a group of students that we're just like dramatically not serving, so that those, like, we want that green and yellow bar to be the same. We want it to be pretty even, and right now there is such a gap that we know that we're not serving our students. The next one, this one was like, this graph makes me, yeah, go for it. You have a question, Heidi?
Yeah. You know, when you look at our Latino. Are you including the ELL in that, or just everybody who's Latino?
That is just Latino, so we know that our students who identify as ELs, I don't have a bar for them specifically.
That's included in the.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because some of our language learners are white, like our Russian language learners, for example. So we don't have language learners on here, and like our SPED line, that is not a separate demographic group. They come from all demographic groups,
Yeah.
right? It's just it's a subpopulation.
Well. When you make a comment like, I mean, let's be realistic. You take somebody who hasn't grown up under a certain language, they have to learn a new language, no matter what country, you go from one country to another country. I mean, there's always gonna be a gap there. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I know that, you always wanna bring everybody up, of course, that's natural. And then so, I guess when I hear things like we want them to be the same, I'm at the point where I'm just like, let's just admit the reality. If there's always gonna be a little bit of a difference, maybe after they've been here X amount of years, and you become more conversant, it's, you catch up. I guess that's what I'm saying about that. And about the SPED thing, I think we have to be careful with SPED numbers, because sometimes you're talking about such a small group in your sample size, that one or two students can really shoot you in a different direction. And so, I just think you always should take that in a district our size. I think it's misleading sometimes when we see SPED numbers going in a way, because you'll have a group that are really impacted and some that are do better, and so that's just my.
Absolutely, and that range of need and services within that specific population is best, right? Like it can be students who have limited accommodations that they need and they're gonna be great, and some that need a lot more and are going to have some struggles. I think for me, to the points you're making, it's like, how do we at least attempt to close that gap though?
Yeah.
Because right now it's significant, and we know that there's always going to be challenges, and especially to the point you're making, like if statistically it takes 7 years for a student to exit out of ELD, then yeah, we're asking them to take the same test that a student who's only ever spoken English is being asked to take.
And we don't offer them in Spanish or another language.
We can in math and science, and the issue with that, like we have forms that teachers can fill out if their student would benefit from taking the test in that other language. A lot of times what we see though is their Spanish literacy isn't high enough to read and write in Spanish in a high enough level to do well on it, reading it in Spanish. Also, absolutely not available in reading, because we are testing their ability to read English. So this is an English only test.
So schools that have dual language programs, say, they probably would have an easier time in those Spanish language.
Absolutely. Yeah, one would assume that they're building that L1, that language, first language, and improving that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, that's it.
So this graph is to really place some of these scores in context. And part of it is from conversations that I know, things that have been brought up by teachers and different people. So we kind of want to place things in context. The first kind of set of bars that I want to acknowledge are those first few years listed here from 2011 till 2014. We had a really high percentage of students being successful. Again, this is where our ranges that would have been reported on the school report cards were in the 60s. We see our white students, though, were doing really well on the assessment. The resources, though, that we were using were not as good for our Latinx students. And that specifically for the elementary schools was Success for All. And I will say, like, my son grew up on Success for All, had good success from it. I know it kind of came up at the last board meeting. We know that Success for All had some positive pieces to it, but we also know it was not success for all. It was success for certain populations. Based on those scores alone, we can see that. The big thing, though, that happened is Success for All had been part of the curriculum actually before 2011 even, and we had seen some good results. The place where we suddenly took a dive, though, was that first year of SBA. They basically what was publicized and made well known was that SBA was going to be a harder test. And so students who had had Success for All their entire educational career took the harder test suddenly and bombed. So we know that while Success for All had some components that were yielding some good results, when we gave it a more rigorous assessment, we did not see the same results anymore. Then from 2015 to 2022, the elementary schools were using Wonders. And we can see while we dropped pretty dramatically in 2015, we were starting to kind of make some traction back up. And then COVID hit and we dropped back down. So we're getting some traction back up again right now and are feeling pretty positive. But as part of the reason why we wanted to give a little bit of a history lesson is those big moves sometimes are where we're seeing, like, was there a time where we were doing really well? Yes, and then something dramatic would happen and we're dropping back down again. And this is like, when I was putting all this together, I was like, wow, it is so black and white. Like, you can see this spot, the harder test comes in, we're struggling. COVID comes, we struggle. So we're seeing this kind of up and down. As soon as we start to kind of get some traction, something else happens. So it was kind of interesting to pull this information together.
I know I said I was gonna pause at this point, but I thought maybe we'll get through all of ELA before we take a pause.
Yes.
So we'll just keep going.
Yep. So same thing for middle school with ELA. I'm not gonna belabor anything. We're seeing very similar like trends, some gains and then some falls. Again, a pretty dramatic dip when we had the new tests come in at 2014 and again at COVID.
What's the A mean in ELA?
English language arts.
Oh,
And again, you can see those same things. The one thing that I am feeling positive about, though, is we're seeing some bigger gains, specifically within the ELA scores. And we're really happy with the curriculum, and we're gonna talk about that a little more at the end of the presentation.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Are these the tests like the kids just got done doing?
Or in the middle of doing, yes.
Right now?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, the middle school just was like this last week was in the middle of doing it.
So, there's an option to opt out your kids.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about that on the next slide.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious, like, how many kids are opted out and?
Take a look at the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
So, again, I think I attribute that big drop there, and you can see the note at the very bottom where we stopped, this is at the high school, we stopped meeting participation rates. So if you go back, 15 years, or when you talk about when accountability started coming around and No Child Left Behind, you were judged, a school district was judged based on your participation rates, because previously to that, people would not test all their students. If they wanted to inflate their grades, they would not test all their students. And so then it started becoming a requirement that you publish your participation rates so that you can just hide behind your high achieving students. And so for a long while, we had really high participation rates. I mean, it was not uncommon to have 100% participation rate.
And specifically at our middle school and our intermediate school, we've stayed at really high, 95% or above. Our high school, we were at 95% or above until 2021-22.
And so we've just, coming out of COVID, when there was a little bit of backlash, political backlash on testing kids and making it more requiring districts to notify parents about how you can opt out. And what we've seen, the trend is it is oftentimes students who would be very successful on these tests opting out. And so you see this very sharp decline because we have more students opting out of the assessment, many of whom we believe would do well.
So what's our participation rate for the high school?
As of this year or last year?
Both, if you have it.
Oh, is there a graph?
I don't think. we-
Okay, I don't have that. I can bring that data to you. Last year it got better. This year, I think we're at like 40% participation as of right now, though we are still in the process of testing. But we have so there's two things with high school, specifically with opt-outs, and Deanne can speak to this better. We have the opt-outs by following the rule, which means they filled out an opt-out form. And then we have the opt-outs by, I'm gonna skip school every time you try to test me. And they basically get to the end of the year and we just have never been able to capture them long enough to get them to finish a test. And so that's kind of like opting out by omission. Where we have some different systems in place this year, and our overall, I filled out the form, is lower this year than it was last year. So we see a good upward climb in terms of our participation, but we know that we still have kids who are gonna just avoid the tests by like last year, Deanne had issues where she'd submit a pass to a kid, like, go get tested, and they just wouldn't come. They just would hide in a bathroom or, do other things to avoid the test.
Is there a way on the test that you can tell if the kids just A, B, just randomize, like, I'm just gonna get through it?
Yeah, we can watch it as they're happening, cause the teacher can see like the progress they're making, that their line is closing really fast, and we teach the teachers, like if they see that, to ask the student if they need to take a break. But we can't actually stop them. It's one of the rules, so.
No,
we
I'm
can't-
doing really well.
Yeah, exactly, I've got this nailed, I figured out my rhythm. I think the thing for me that was, like, as we pulled this data too, is again, this is a spot where we see our gap closing, like our difference between our different population groups is actually narrower. And this, to Heidi's kind of point, is more what we'd want to see. Like, they're pretty close, like they're not exactly aligned, but they are in the same direction and kind of following each other's path. So it saddens me when we know that COVID year hit and we took such a dip, because we were actually outperforming at the high school level, the state averages.
I remember that.
And consistently, even with Smarter Balance in 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the essential skills that were required for graduation or not, and that happened in one of them cases.
And we've talked about that at other board meetings.
All right, so,
And same kind of just snapshot of it.
and then we thought we'd throw, so the next slide just looks at a cohort group where we have then one more.
Yeah, one more.
Where you can see so current eighth graders, which are testing right now, this is how they did in fifth, sixth, and seventh grade. And then also current sixth graders, who are also testing right now, how they did as third, fourth, and fifth graders. So that's another way we look at data, is how is the cohort of students doing as they move through. So, for the sake of time, I don't know if we want to whip around or any thoughts on the ELA data. Since I told you I was gonna ask you.
Anyone?
I would. So the. Intermediate and the primary, intermediate data. you definitely have a widening, like you don't have the rebound in our Latino students. Is there any reason? Is there any? I mean, can we look back and say with any clarity why that may be happening?
I think it's a good question to explore more. I know that our on track to language proficiency has also not seen a good rebound. We have students that are like struggling and not exiting out of ELD services as fast as the state wants them to. And so what I can say, not necessarily to why is this the case, but I will say that we're deeply like looking at our ELD program model and like analyzing like, is this working, and making some changes for next year.
Cause I understand there may always be a gap, but
That's,
trend line
yeah,
is, I mean, the trends are what worry me is because we're not seeing growth.
it's going this way.
Yeah, you've got a.
So we
pattern.
combine what Heidi said earlier with your, I mean, that's what we're trying to look for, is we understand kids are going to come, if they don't come from English rich homes, that they're going to naturally struggle when they hit school with these assessments, but can we look at trend data to say that we're closing that gap?
I mean, to me, like the high school, it's kind of an anomaly, not an anomaly, but you're seeing that, you know what I mean? You're seeing right direction, right growth in all categories. I understand there's still a gap and that's, you know what I mean? But, so anyway, that was my only comment about it. So.
Continue.
Any others? Okay, moving on to math.
So math is a lot the same. We, you know, see that gap that still exists. We see a pretty dramatic dip that comes with our first year of Smarter Balance. And much to Glenn's point, like we saw some gradual increases, but right now in terms of post-COVID, we're really flat. We're just not seeing growth the way we would want to or expect to, in a general sense.
One of the things that you have to do, math has become much more language intense. It is not just memorizing math facts. You have to have a strong vocabulary and you have to, you know, you have to explicitly teach the math vocabulary, especially for your language learners. Because if you just work from a place where you think kids will use context clues, you'll have some kids get it by the use of just context clues. But if you don't explicitly teach the math vocabulary, kids are going to struggle on those assessments and struggle in math.
I couldn't pass. Well, and the other thing I will point out that's a difference between the math assessment and the English assessment is that one thing, as a former English teacher, that's really obvious is our standards really spiral. Once you've learned how to read, it's like, read and tell us what you read, read and tell us what you read, write about what you read, read and tell us what you read. And it kind of is the same thing. The only thing that changes is it's a little more complex, it's a little more age appropriate, etc. Math is a different test every year because they're brand new standards, and some of them, you know, spiral in the sense that like, as I learn to be a good math problem solver, or as I learn to apply certain skills, those are every year skills. But the difference between like what I would learn in fourth grade math and what I would learn in algebra, very different, right? So it's not like, once I get some traction, I'm gonna do better on this English test every single year. With math, it could look like brand new content. And what we see, especially at the high school and middle school level, is if there were skills that are missing, it is really hard to close those gaps. And those scores really reflect that.
I think one of the things to just kind of echo that, and we'll pause at the math piece, is that it's also really difficult for math teachers to want to move on and expose kids to other standards and other aspects of math. If I know the biggest, it's always the fractions. When kids don't pick up the fractions, then it's really easy for teachers to want to sit there and go, I'm not moving on until we get this. But then we also don't prepare them for other aspects of math that they need to know. And so trying to kind of keep people to a scope and sequence of math can really be difficult when you don't think that they're ready to move on.
Can I have, ask one more question
Yeah.
about math? I mean, just the high school math just begs the question. These new math materials, is it just because they're so different and difficult to teach? I mean, why are the scores so low?
I think that's the participation rates again.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, our hope is actually we're seeing some growth, but the participation rate is definitely, it's the worst of the high school. It's very hard.
Is it the only school that's able to opt out?
Nope, everyone else can opt out too. My gut, if I was to put an analysis on it, is that in the elementary and middle, it's just like everyone's testing. At the high school, family, like parents don't wanna fight their teenager on it. And so when their teenager comes home and says, sign this permission slip for me, please. I don't wanna take this test. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna argue with you and opt you out. So
Maybe some of the parents don't even know that the permission slip comes.
very possible. Very possible. Yeah.
And as a parent of a high school.
I thought it was a band field trip.
I didn't know about this field trip.
Did 21-22 have an anomaly for sped? Cause I see a spike on two different metrics
I
here.
noticed that too.
Did we just not test because we were in the throes of COVID? Cause it's showing up in the intermediate map and it also showed up in language. And I just didn't know.
That was the year that the intermediate school data, right?
Oh.
I mean, if
Okay.
it's an anomaly because of
Um,
COVID, I understand that. I
It
just,
was an anomaly because that was the one year that opt-outs went really high at the intermediate school.
oh, okay.
As specifically,
No, wasn't it that every student, the state report card?
Oh!
Student?
that's what it was. We made a mistake on the state report card and reported that basically the entire intermediate school was sped on accident. And
Okay.
it was like a power school thing, and so we did great that year because everyone was just flying high. So that was what it was. Thank you.
Yes.
What happened?
So that's.
There was an error in Power School that marked all the intermediate school as sped. And so there was misreporting that,
Which is why you got
like a weird,
a little
Jump.
weird spike there. I was just trying to figure out trend lines and
Yeah.
that was.
yep. Jenny, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just wondering if we know that it was wrong, can we go back to the state and say this was wrong?
Nope,
Trying.
we tried. I will tell you, it's my first year here. It was like, oh, that is quite a mistake to make, because we just didn't catch it in the data,
Yeah.
like thing, so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think on one of the state report cards, it even said like, oh, we have like 70% of
Yeah.
identified as disabilities. I was like, oh, no, that can't be right.
No, and if you went and got the report card that at that time, if you go from the state,
Yeah.
it's still wrong. If you got it from our website at that time, we put a disclaimer on it that's like, this is inaccurate data,
Okay.
please see this instead.
Yeah, I got it.
But the state wouldn't change it for us. They're like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's like, well,
Okay.
all right, thanks.
Okay, Dan.
All right, so ninth grade on track versus graduation, we're gonna go through these a little bit quicker,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, the only thing we really wanna talk about with this is that both of these are really high actually, and high at the state kind of level as well. Like, we're right up there with state averages with both our ninth grade on track and our graduation rates. And we have pretty insignificant gaps between our different student populations. And what's great about this too is that what you don't want is a big gap between ninth grade on track and graduation. Because what that means, if your ninth grade on track rates are really low, that means we're working really hard to get them to graduate. But if they're leaving ninth grade on track, that graduation is an easier number to hit. So as we continue to increase our ninth grade on track, which we're seeing that, some trends in that direction, we're gonna keep increasing our graduation rates as well.
We got some comments there. We'll just keep moving through and go on to regular attendance there. Well, any questions on the graduation rate information or ninth grade on track?
Well, graduation rates have to do with attendance, counting hours primarily.
No,
It's the Q credits, so it's
Well,
a-
credits, attendance, putting in the classroom time?
No, that's a very, you have to pass the class, but we have, like, attendance isn't a complete fact, it definitely helps. Like, the better your attendance, the easier it's gonna be for you to pass the class. But we have good systems in place for kids who are maybe struggling with their attendance to still get the work they need to be able to pass still. It used to be that you had to actually required seat hours, that's not the case anymore.
I was trying to understand why the success with graduation rates when math achievement is at 9%. And so I'm thinking it must be easier to amass 26.5 credits or whatever the benchmark is than to actually learn the material and pass these classes with enough learning to score better than that on the exam or assessment.
Well, I think you've hit on, some of these data points are sort of in competition with each other. When your district's judged on your graduation rate, it's easy, we want kids to graduate on time, we want to award them the credits, and so, but how tightly aligned are our internal assessments that teachers are giving to the state standards, so there's a better comparison between the grades they're getting. And there's definitely a big difference between our state assessment data and our graduation rate, or the grades that students are earning.
Yeah, and I think Desiree comments somewhere in here that there's a difference between North Marion School District standards and state assessment standards. And
I think that is an assumption we can make based on what we know, like, they're all supposed to be really well aligned, but.
should be, but.
Right. And I think the other factor that's difficult is to the point like Jenny made too, which is like, I would not assume that because a kid didn't pass the state assessment, that they don't know math. Because there are plenty of kids who work real hard to not take that state assessment very seriously. And there's no incentive to take it seriously either. So there's not always a direct correlation, but we know we have some gaps to fill, for sure. Like, for sure.
I have a question just real quick on, when we talk about the grades, there's like so many math credits required. Two questions, I guess. Are we giving math credits for like welding or engineering or construction? No. Okay, does it have to be grade level math? Because in my day, it was, even if you were a senior, you could go to freshman math and get your credit.
So it has to be, once you've earned a specific credit, you've earned it, so you
Yeah.
can't just earn 9th grade math 3 times.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, but you can be below grade level.
No, at the high school, it has to be algebra 1 or above, so they do algebra 1 their freshman year, and then usually our sequence is pretty standard, it's geometry, then algebra 2. We have some more like technical math, statistics, things, but all of those are still algebra 1 or above. And so you're progressing through harder and harder math. We don't have a, low level, this is technically 8th grade math, and we're gonna, because and that used to exist, when they updated the math standards, they said, nope, from this point, you earn 3 credits of math, and all the classes have to be algebra 1 or above.
Okay, thanks.
So even at one point, I remember at the high school, we debated, should we offer a pre-algebra class for kids who are coming in struggling? And we didn't want to, because we knew kids wouldn't take it because they could only get elective credit for it. We couldn't give them math credit because it was below algebra 1.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right now, though, in algebra 1, first trimester is kind of pre-algebra, and they do end up getting an elective credit because it's a year-long math.
Yeah.
So then they get in the second and third trimester, they get a competitive.
Okay, sorry.
It's all right, moving on to regular attendance. So you know, this has been a focus of ours, and so this is just showing you, where you can see at the different schools where we're seeing a good trend in primary and our regular attenders data. We don't need to spend a lot of time on these slides, just to show that we are making a difference in this area. And so we can go all the way to the slide that's a screenshot. We're gonna stop there for just a moment. And I like that we took a screenshot that has your little icon in the upper right hand corner. Isn't it the screenshot? I'm like, there's Stacy's little thumbnail up in the upper right.
Day I got hired.
So I only point this slide out to you because when we had the vice principals come and talk about this, this is how we need to be thinking about how we solve some of the issues in terms of noticing when kids are, and I will say, attendance is an easier one to address. But when you see a kid not meeting the standard that you've set, how do you apply an intervention consistently to that group of students consistently to see, does that intervention work? And so to where you can mine down from going, okay, we're gonna give all the kids that are in this attendance group are all going to get an attendance letter or a parent contact. Did we see that group respond to where you finally get down to the individual to figure out what that individual's needs are? That's the kind of theory that we need to be practicing in our content area classes too. So when kids are not at standard, what is our universal response to that until we get down to the individual student level? So that's why I threw this screenshot up there, is because we need to apply the same kind of thinking in our content areas too. And then the next one.
Yeah, so I think as we were reflecting back on the data we're presenting to you, because it's information that you've had before, we put it in a different context. And there wasn't this moment like it was like, and if we could go back to this year, we just repeat that, we'd be great, or this is the trend. So we didn't want it to seem like we're making excuses for why things are struggling, but we do want to paint a picture of where we're going. And one of the things we've been talking about as an admin team is really understanding how to use data more effectively to make decisions. This is from the book Street Data, and she breaks down data at 3 different levels. There's satellite data, which is a lot like what we looked at today. It's big, it gives you a picture, you can tell the Amazon's on fire, but you can't tell which trees are. Map data, we're starting to zoom in. We are looking at buildings, we are looking at maybe individual teachers or grade levels. We're starting to figure out questions like Glenn asked, where we start to know more about what specifically is going wrong. And then we can look at street data, and that's where we start to understand what is the experience of the end user? What are our kids actually experiencing when they're sitting in class? Because it's one thing to look at all this data and say like, oh, all we have to do is this with our teaching or whatever. But if a kid's like, I hate this, I don't want to be here, and I'm disengaged, then we're not actually solving any problems. So understanding what our kids are actually dealing with as we zoom in even further. And things like Youth Truth or student interviews help us with that. And what we're seeing is by having, go for it, Linda, you're good. By having those conversations, we're starting to see results. And so this is hot off the presses. Right now, we have about 67% of our 6th grade ELA scores reported. And our current passing rate, and actually we believe it's actually up to 41% now, which is above the state average. We're at 38% passing. The current passing rate of 34, our 2024 passing rate was 32, so we've jumped 6 points. And actually, if it is 41, it's even more than 6 points, and our state average right now is 40. And that's just with 67% of the scores being reported. And we know actually that our ladder scores tend to be even better, because these are the kids that are still taking the test and they're trying really, really hard. So we tend to see a trend of scores going up. Same thing happened with our 7th grade. We have 59% of those scores reported at this moment with a 35% passing rate. The 7th grade passing rate was 36. State average is 39, but we see some climbs, and you can see what you have on the graphs above are our cohort data. So this is like what they did, like overall, how have these scores jumped? And all of the trends are going up. Because they're scoring higher now than they did in 2022. So they're growing across the board. And with eighth grade, we're at 53% reported. Current passing rate is 31%. Last year was at 21%, which means we've already jumped 10%. And the state average is 35, and we anticipate this will go up also.
And our eighth graders took longer than all the others.
So, and this is really a result of some phenomenal work being done by our middle school teachers, specifically around gathering data and going, where do they have gaps? And doing intensive interventions in the classroom, not expecting the school to do it, but like really focus on who is in my class, what do I know that they need, and giving them what they need, and suddenly we see these jumps, and we anticipate that this will go even higher. We do not have the same data for the other two schools, not because of anything bad. The intermediate has not started testing, and the high school is well, we do have some high school. So they're at 42% of scores reported, and that includes our opt-outs. And the current passing rate is 34%, and last year is at 42 with a current state average of 48. But that's with a really low number reported so far, so we anticipate this will go up as well. And
That's
intermediate
fine.
school, we just don't have yet.
And I just wanna kind of make a couple compliments is that, you know, one of the reasons we added the middle school data is because one of their teachers reached out to us last Thursday and says, I gotta show you what's happening, and was really excited. And so, you know, the principals are doing a great job of really prioritizing this and building a culture where this really matters. And so, you know, we thought we just had to share this, you know, we were done with the presentation. But with the middle school coming in saying, here, you gotta see this, we just felt it was necessary. And today I was at the intermediate school, and Dave Sheldon had a pep assembly to promote trying your best on the state assessment, and he had 4 fifth graders that he interviewed to talk to the whole school about the importance of trying your best. And one kid said, you know, he says, I want to do my best because this is a great school, and I want the whole state to know that this is a great school. And it was just the cutest thing. And so again, building that culture of always doing your best, really hats off to the principals and the teachers for building that culture.
And I will point out with the 11th grade data, we still see these trends going up. Even like, and they only have 2 data points because they haven't tested since 8th grade. Remember, they don't test except for in 11th grade. So we're still seeing really good trends in the right direction. And so we know that we're heading in the right direction.
All right, round robin. Robert?
I mean, thank you for presenting all that, so, yeah, you worked hard on it, so it's, thank you. Good information.
Glenn?
I don't have any necessarily questions. I'm assuming regular attendance is sort of like ripples on the pond. You'll see, or, you know, you'll see it show up later. I'm assuming in the data, so the kids are actually,
Coming.
yeah, if they're actually in the seats, that have a higher likelihood of doing that, so.
Yeah.
Merle?
I'll say what I should have said before I ever said anything else. And that's that I am really impressed with the energy and the effort and hours that went into providing this good for us. And it's hard, and I still would encourage looking at a bigger picture. In part, and looking at other factors, and there are more things that come to mind even as I'm here. One of them is screen time and its impact on scores, but I know it's hard. I took algebra 2 and knew math, and Merle didn't do well.
Well, the credits here on the presentation, Des put, you know, we started on this and like, how many slides is this gonna be, Dad? It's like, it
I try not to talk, I get super excited about this stuff, though, it's
good.
us being aware of it is what's gonna change the culture.
So
Yeah.
3 nights ago, I got out the algebra 2 book,
Oh, no.
and I worked 9 problems, and I only had to look at the answer 4 times. So I have a lot of work ahead of me.
Heidi?
This was a really good presentation. Thank you very much. And it helps me to understand a lot, especially these last few slides. They're very helpful and encouraging. I kind of go back to, some slides you provided us several, maybe a month or 2 ago. You know, they showed they were comparison with other districts and where we were, and that was quite alarming to me, especially when we look at districts, which I think are good comparisons like Jervis and Gladstone. And so I always wonder, like, what is, because there's so many factors that go into that number, like you said, like participation rates and, your ratio of your demographics and all this kind of stuff. So it's hard to know how to compare, but, and so I guess that's why I'm just curious, like, what is North Marion doing or not doing that other districts seem to be doing that, and I don't know, if it's curriculum, it's a lot of different things, but this has helped explain some of it, and I appreciate it. And I think that you guys are the right people at the helm and our other leadership, people in other leadership positions, and I appreciate your efforts, and I'm hopeful. That says it.
Well, I still haven't forgotten about that strategic plan thing that we said weeks ago. Yeah.
Debbie?
Yeah, I would echo what everybody else has said. Thank you. We asked for data, we got it. I love it. I would be opposite of Merle. He wants a higher view, and I'm the type I want to drill in and really see, data is great. It's great to have. But I really am excited to see an actionable plan put together that's really gonna raise the roof for everybody, not just our English language learners, but also our English speaking students, because I mean, it's obvious, it's across the board that everybody's struggling. And I specifically wanted to ask about the interventions that are done, like early interventions as far as math and reading. What is done, and like, give me a couple specific examples at the schools, because I feel like sometimes we're just pushing kids through. You guys might be struggling, but we're gonna keep going and you'll get it eventually, so.
At the 2 elementary schools, they take their ongoing assessment data, so through their universal screeners, STAR and HMH Growth. And they take that data and it kind of disaggregates into what standards kids are specifically having gaps on. And then they are forming independent kind of small groups. And then they have intervention time throughout the day. And those small groups get specific intervention teaching by different, like, basically the whole 5th grade stops, kids shuffle to a new teacher, that teacher knows what gaps that student has and does specific interventions for them. That's right now at both of those schools, primarily focused in the area of reading. And they're looking to start layering in math, like next year, is the hope. Or find new ways to approach how to do that intervention. From at the primary school, they're doing some interesting things at like the kindergarten group. So rather than having kids go to a new teacher, they actually are pushing the teachers in and doing those interventions in the classroom a little bit more so that kids aren't losing time in transitions. So little things like that are happening. At the middle school and the high school, that's where our intervention models need work, because it's hard to pull kids out of classes, to take electives away, et cetera. And so that, the middle school I gave as an example, they're doing some additional assessments. See, what is the flow fluency, where they're able to identify elements of their reading and reading comprehension, how quickly they can read, et cetera. And then teachers are saying, okay, in my class, I'm gonna do some small group instruction and pulling kids and doing specific interventions with them. and whole group instruction just on different strategies in reading. And that's why we're seeing some of those results at the middle school.
What kind of, like, I guess things are being sent home or trying to include parents saying like, your kid needs a little extra help reading, do the, you know, I'm just thinking back to like SFA when
Yep.
you had the reading log and you signed off that you guys read every day, kind of
Right.
thing, you know, that
Yep.
type of thing.
Those pieces are still in progress, I think. I think it's probably, like, from what I've heard from the two instructional coaches, that piece of parent communication is their next thing to tackle.
Perfect.
And it's that piece of like, how are we just really clear of what are the standards, kind of like Dan was saying. We know that it's a gap because when we look at our youth truth data, we were actually talking about, do we add this one more slide about youth truth? We hear from parents at the two intermediate and primary school saying, I don't know how my kid's doing and no one's telling me. And then teachers saying, I don't know how to talk to parents. So those were actually both really high scoring
Yeah.
questions that tell us we aren't communicating well and there's a fear of communicating and being really transparent with how is your kid doing. So that's the kind of next thing to tackle.
You know, I used to always go through my kids' backpacks. I mean, and there was a lot of stuff that was printed, like there was a report, you know, that was put out at the end of the week, and then I got the, you know, the principal letter. And a lot of printed stuff, and I don't think that that's necessarily bad to have some printed things. We don't have to be paperless in everything, but, I don't know, that's just.
Kelsey?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing all this data. I'm looking forward to many more data sessions. And I would just echo Jenny and the fact that I would love to see action plan pieces. And I know that's gonna come along with the strategic plan, because data, if you don't do anything about it, it's data. So, yeah, so I thank you both so much. Just, we're near the end, but Stacy, did you wanna chime in?
Yeah, so we have an Avid showcase on Wednesday. It's actually a practice for a fall one, but when we invite more people, the focus is on Avid in a rural school, a small school. And so I have the agenda there. You are all invited. We'd love to be prepared. If you would like to drop in some just RSVPs, we can. West Coast is not very RSVP. But it'd be great, but if you just wanna drop by, you can, we're gonna be in some classrooms, there's gonna be a student panel. And some debrief with some teachers, and so it's to find out a little bit more about some of the programs and our classrooms, we would like to have you there.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
That's. Yeah. Thank you again. Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate you guys being collaborative in the transition. Thanks, Linda. I know you're doing a ton of work right now. So, I'll adjourn this meeting at, is it 7:47? No,
37.
37. Yeah.